Hello, everyone, and welcome back to This Week in Guns, brought to you by Patriot, Patch Company, VZ Grips, and MAF Corporation. This show offers commentary on the latest firearms industry news, information, and buzz. I'm your host, Matthew LaRosier, and I'm joined today by Mr. Ivan T. Troll, and we're here to talk to you about several different things, including the election.
Yes.
You guys might be talking about how, to yourselves, well, the election, that's old news. We already knew that happened. And I'm going to steal a statement from one of my favorite YouTubers, David Angelo. Let's see, the thing is, we had to give time for all of our competitors to come out there and discuss this and do it wrong, in the hopes that, you know, they might have finally hit a beat and done a good job. But this was not the case. Isn't that right, Ivan?
It's certainly worked out that way. And I would like to iterate that I had called, I don't know if I'd done this on the show or it was just in the Discord chat, but prior to Biden dropping out, I said Biden would drop out. I said Kamala would run for the Democrats. And I said that Trump would win the popular vote because of it. And I was joking the entire time. Of course, I joked about every element of that I didn't think would actually happen. And then it all did. But now I'm going to pretend like it was an ironic joke where I was joking about joking. And I meant it entirely. I should have bet on it, really.
The funny thing was, I was actually on election day. I went to an election day barbecue with many people who I disagreed with politically, in every way. And the rule there was you weren't allowed to talk about the election, right? And this was like at 5 p.m. So long before anything had come in. And every chance I got, I just kept saying, geez, guys, I just can't believe Trump won the popular vote. And they laugh at me. And at one point, somebody said, if you keep saying that, it's going to happen. And I kept saying that. And so I'd like to take at least some credit for Trump winning by the popular vote by like almost 5 million.
Yeah, several million.
That wasn't close. And so the interesting thing is, like, people are saying, like, people do all of this stupid stat analysis after an election, and more black people, more Hispanic people voted for Trump than they did last time. But I mean, the real key thing here was the like 15 million Dems that just didn't vote.
They just decided to not vote this time.
They just decided, this time it wasn't going to be a nice time. And, some of that, like a similar thing happened with Trump, right? I think a lot fewer people came out to vote for Trump the second time he ran.
Of course, but by the final count, I believe it's just slightly above where it was last year. And so the 15 million people that materialized and definitely voted last time just decided not to this time. Because there was actually, you know what? I have seen some breaking sources from Blue Anon, the sort of mirror image of QAnon, but they figured it out. Actually, the election was rigged, and that's why there's 15 million missing votes. How can you explain 15 million votes appearing one year and disappearing the next? Rigged.
Yeah, they did a rigging. God.
Elon Musk did it supposedly with Starlink. He controls the internet. That's
why FEMA was trying to prevent him from dropping all the Starlinks off in the disaster zone, because they knew what he was up to.
Mm-hmm. So of course, the funny thing about this is, for years now, like 20 years now, every time a Republicans won an election, it was not with the popular vote. And right. So we've always heard about how the electoral college is corrupt and awful and such a terrible system, these sorts of things.
Right.
And we've sort of heard this drumbeat at least more recently about, voter ID and security. And you typically have the blue side saying we don't need that, because I don't think it's controversial to say if it's going to help one side or the other, it's going to help them in the popular vote to not have these voter ID things. And I think that's why you see the states they won handily don't require voter ID across the board. And so it's funny now that I don't know that it's necessarily mainstream, but there are a surprising number of left-wing pundits who are now telling us Elon Musk stole the election because of Starlink, and then everybody
wait, hold on. Are they actually saying that?
Yes, that is actually a thing that has been said.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Because of the voting machines and the electronic interference and all this, and the microwaves. But
see, look, here's where the Starlink came into play. But yeah, no, I mean we can clearly see the Starlink interference in this. It's a
RTX on, RTX off.
Yeah, somebody said Wisconsin too big to rig. Look at this chart, and you do see the votes, and there's just a sudden. This is the classic one we used to see, in the last election where there's just that sudden. Boop. But it didn't pass the, it didn't pass the RTX enabled. The VTEC did not.
VTEC not kick in.
VTEC floated the valves. So yeah, no. Really, really big and consequential election potentially. If anyone can get their cards in order, I'm still, I'm of the nothing ever happens camp here. But maybe just because I'm jaded, maybe we'll actually see some cool stuff happen, like me and Brandon Herrera vying to get into the ATM. It's been a fun thing on Twitter, so that's exciting. I would definitely unironically do that, and I've applied to everything I can apply to. So I think there might be a link in the comments or the description where you could support this notion. So check that out. But yeah, so between that and then full control of the government, which they didn't do anything with last time.
It's not a veto-proof majority, and we had a similar situation for Trump's the first half of Trump's first presidency, and gun rights wise, needle didn't really move. And I've seen people, and to me it still sort of seems like cope, but I've seen people explain that away as if of Trump's priorities, guns weren't that high, and he was still figuring out because he's an outsider to Washington, blah blah blah. Okay, yeah, maybe. So I'll give him the benefit of the doubt this time around, and we'll just have to see.
Right.
But there's certainly things that both at the executive level, there's things that are wrong currently executive that could be stopped with executive action.
Yeah, that could be stopped very quickly and very handily. Yeah.
And there's things that have been, and I guess when I mentioned that the first time, things that have been wrong in the past 4 years that they could amend quickly. But then there's things that have been wrong for the past 40 years that could be amended just as quickly. So it'll be interesting to see what, if any, action is taken there at the executive level, as well as in Congress itself, with control in both houses. Things like Thomas Massey's concealed carry bill potentially have more wind beneath their wings, because I think that's rather well written. Hopefully we have a better written version of the Hearing Protection Act than we've seen in years past, but a Hearing Protection Act that binds the hands of the states in their attempts to have their own versions of suppressor regulations. Right. Got to be honest, that would be pretty cool.
Yep. And perhaps some of the results we've seen could have been the fact that the White House sent this reminder to everybody of who to vote for right before. This is October 30th. This is the tweet, "It's time," with an orange background, "Ban assault weapons," which, great timing on an issue that's, so clearly a big political winner for you.
Right. I'd seen some analysis from our friend Stephen Gutowski over at The Reload about this has been the first election probably in the past 20, 30 years where gun control was like a third or fourth string issue, where maybe one question was asked about it at the debates, but even then it wasn't like really answered, and it wasn't really pushed on.
Yeah, no, it was like just the tired, the same tired rhetoric, just repeated.
Like what gun measures do you support? I support in the background checks and banning them all.
Mental health, and on the Republican side, you go, oh, the people are crazy in the mental health, and then on the Democrat side, assault weapon, Second Amendment hunt, right? And look at you're a big huntsman, so you must have been in favor of that.
Yeah, I'm doing a Second Amendment hunt right now. Tim said that we got to go and do the pheasant, so I'm going to find a pleasant pheasant and I'm going to kill it.
And that's what the Second Amendment is really all about.
That's
right?
what it's truly, well and truly exactly about is to put on your hunting cap and do a big sport hunt.
But yeah, so like you said, we had in the Trump campaign website, you said it's like a fourth string issue. Yeah, look at here in their list of priorities. 7 last. Finally, President Trump will sign concealed carry reciprocity legislation, fully secure the border, dramatically increase blah blah blah. So this is, this whole statement was on Trump being tough on crime to restore law and order, and this video that people kept clipping from. It's funny because it's so different now than it was 4 years ago.
Yes.
I was never sure whether the video was AI generated or not.
Yeah, like whenever he started doing these series of videos, I think that the particular ones that people have been clipping were from 2023.
Yep, this one I just put up. Yeah,
that they had a different sort of gravity to them because of the fact that it still seemed like a long shot or far off then, and now that it's sort of here, it's like, well, we're gonna see how many of those things he actually meant, because some of the things he was saying were pretty novel, as far as I don't know that I've seen a politician ever utter such a thing before. And I know that there's a knee-jerk reaction from some people to say it sounds like fascism or what have you, but there's certainly some strains of populism going on there,
right?
And maybe your gateway fascism to be to at least lend some credibility to the ideas being thrown around there. But it'll certainly be interesting to see how much of that, because again, his first election, there was a lot of rhetoric, and a lot of it was populist rhetoric, and then he gets in office and none of it materializes. And and it's not even like a lack of trying thing. Like, he just didn't try and didn't follow up, like the locking Hillary Clinton up, right? In fact, he gets into office and says, no, that's not how Americans should actually operate. He was just using that to gin people up while running. So we'll have to see. We'll have to see how the wheat gets separated from the chaff this time around.
Yeah, and I think that one of the most powerful things he could do, because he did everything right, and they indicted him, and that was really messed up. And so I think the most powerful thing he could do is just immediately pardon Biden's son, because that would just defang the creatures very much. Who knows what? But if he were to do that, it would be completely inconsistent with some of these statements. So, while we did observe, he says here at number 7 that he'll sign concealed carry reciprocity legislation. Well, number 2 is a little different. President Trump will require local law enforcement agencies receiving DOJ grants to return to proven policing measures such as stop and frisk, strictly enforcing existing gun laws, cracking down on the open use of illegal drugs, and cooperating with ICE to arrest and deport criminal aliens. And so there's a lot of different elements there, right? But strictly enforce existing gun laws is a little bit different from the idea endorsed with concealed carry reciprocity. I guess in the context of, if you believe, as is mentioned here, that, a lot of this country has been turned into violent cesspools of bloodshed and crime, they might actually work together, because then the idea of needing concealed carry and the importance of concealed carry kind of shines. But like you said, it's kind of hard to divine a straightforward policy initiative from that. But like you said, we'll see. I do think that he has very law and order vibes to him, but I do wonder how much him being indicted and being dragged through the horrible, cumbersome mess that is the criminal justice system might have colored that. Right. I think it would be impossible for that not to soften him a little bit on hard criminal penalties for everything. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And but anyway, maybe that's me huffing my own copium, I guess. I would love to see. I think strictly enforcing laws make sense when you have laws that are rational and straightforward across the board, that basically any average person can understand, don't hurt people or take their stuff, right? I think we can all agree it's not good to be hurt or have your stuff taken. But then when you start getting onto, some of the gun laws we'll talk about later in the show, it's like, I don't think those laws should be enforced strictly. I think they should be struck down. But anyway, yeah, so that's one of the election results we'll talk about here. I think we'll be pretty much done talking about federal election results, but I'd be remiss to say that I'm not excited. I do think, especially in the federal gun law context, I think that there's a lot of people who, have an interest in making things better, at least for us. And it would be foolish of me to say I wasn't excited about that, because I'd be lying, and I don't want to lie. And there's one other thing that it would be total lie for me to say I wasn't excited about, and that is VZGrips.com. Guys, these are proven, excellent G10 patent alloy, super sticky grips for the American Patriot, and the monies go to Florida. That's the most important country in this national cooperative thing that we have. And guys, if you use promotional code ThisWeek15, that's THISWEEK15, you can get 15% off of your order on something so important as the grips on your concealed carry pistol or duty gun, however you want to say it. It's really a small investment when you think about it. And the simple fact is, Ivan and I have both shot guns with and without VZ grips, and I'd be lying if I said it didn't make a massive difference.
They do feel good, and they are nice.
They feel good. I don't recommend chewing on them. It will hurt your teeth because they are truly strong, but it holds the gun in your hand, and especially with the one I always say is that 40 cal high power, it completely changed the gun. Because with it had slick wood grips before, and the thing was trying to get out of my hands, and then I got the Palm Swell grooved Coyote Brown ones from VZ Grips, and now the thing can just stay on target and deliver load after load of punishing 40 caliber down range. So guys, VZGrips.com, promotional code ThisWeek15. Then after that, so Colorado had their own little election. And I think you guys might remember last time I issued some opinions about Colorado. But this matches with that. They have passed again by ballot initiative. Colorado Proposition KK. These people have taxed themselves 6.5% excise tax on gun and ammunition manufacturers and seller. 54.3% to 45.7%. So that's 1.3 million votes yes to 1.37 million votes no. That's awful. Especially, go on.
It's really hard to wrap one's head around the I'm going to say faulty mechanisms that allow you to have a ballot measure that undermines the rights that you have that are either protected or conveyed through the Bill of Rights. Yeah. I don't think you should be able to have a ballot measure about whether or not you get to bring slavery back. But then also we go and look at California, who had a ballot measure to get rid of slavery in the state. Right. They said no. They said we'd actually rather keep that.
Yeah.
And then Lee smiled in his grave.
Yeah. So This is really a case of two wolves and a sheep voting on what to eat to dinner, right?
Right.
So the idea was, if passed, the proposition would allocate the tax revenue to school security and mental health service for veterans, domestic and other violence victims, and at-risk youth.
I guarantee this is going into a general fund because they're not going to spend it once it goes into that fund because they surely, they don't have these systems in place or they'd name them.
Yeah. And so the people who would vote yes on this are the people who would never pay the tax anyway.
Right.
And that's the really problematic thing. And why, I like the system we have in Florida where you need to have 60% at least. Why on earth should two wolves and a sheep vote on what to eat for dinner?
Right. Like the whole, like, I'm going to call it like belligerent taxing, where you're finding some subsect of the population that you don't like. Like it's, if you observe this holiday, 20% tax on all goods associated with that holiday. I don't think you can, I don't like if you taxed menorahs or whatever at 50%, I don't think you can do that.
Right.
I don't think that's a valid exercise of any taxing power that any governmental authority in the entire country has.
Well, it means any simple majority can pinpoint something they don't like about the minority.
And it doesn't even have to be something they don't like, just something that doesn't bother them, right? It's like,
right.
I mean, just to throw a random example out there, it's, I don't know, let's go ahead and levy a tax on people who drive cars that are made in Japan. That's less than 50% of the country. And this fund goes into the Buy Ice Cream and Unicorns for Orphans Fund. Well, this is going to be massively popular, and everybody that doesn't drive a Japanese car will say, yes, go ahead and do this tax. It doesn't bother me. And everybody who
I love the Ice Cream Orphan Fund. That's wonderful.
Orphans need more ice cream.
And I'm interested to see what the text of the ballot initiative was, because I'm sure it was kind of stupid. Here, hold on. Okay, yeah, here's the ballot text. Shall state taxes be increased by $39 million annually to fund mental health services, including for military veterans and at-risk youth, school safety and gun violence prevention, and support services for victims of domestic violence and other violent crimes by authorizing a tax on gun dealers, gun manufacturers, and ammunition vendors at the rate of 6.5% of the net taxable sales from the retail sale of any gun precursor part, or ammunition, with the state keeping and spending all of the new tax revenue as a voter-approved revenue change. That is not rationally written. Like, that does not properly advise the voter of what is happening.
It's certainly, burying that lead. And I do just want to emphasize again, it's nuts that this could be done in the first place at all about any tax. It's I mean, it should be treated as open defiance of the United States whenever you do that, about a right that you agreed to respect when you were let into the country in the first place. So I think that Colorado should be annexed until we can figure out what the hell is going on.
I think it's an act. I think it's all an act. But let's parse this document, right? So it starts by asking, should we raise $40 million to do all of this lovely things? And don't worry, the only people who's going to pay for it are gun dealers, manufacturers, and ammunition vendors. Look, a tax on dealers, manufacturers, and vendors. People can't internalize that they wind up paying the tax if they buy, if they basically engage with a gun at all. And then even if they do internalize that, they're like, right, but 40 million for all of these lovely things. They can pay for it. It's 6.5%. This reminds me of we had a ballot measure in Florida that passed by a wide margin because the way it was written was it suggested a 1 penny, and that's what they called it, a 1 penny tax on all sales. Well, it wasn't the state of Florida; it was in my county at the time, to be used for the firefighters and their lovely little, lovely firefighter people. We're going to raise the money for them. And everyone was saying, oh, well, it's just a penny. And so the sales tax went up by a whole percent.
Yep.
Because they passed the penny tax. I just think it's so unbelievably dishonest and horrible that this is like, it's like that Oz moment. You pull back the curtain, and instead of it just being an old dude, it's just like monkeys and typewriters, and the monkeys are voting on the other monkeys like proposition, like based
chimps
on
versus baboons.
Yeah, chimps versus baboons, and they're interpreting each other, and they're just and giving each other the most benefit of the doubt. It's horrible. So speaking of ballot amendments, in Florida, Amendment 2, the Second Amendment passed in Florida. Amendment 2, Florida voters establish a state constitutional right to hunt and fish.
Thanks.
Very importantly here, current Florida wildlife rules will not be impacted.
Doesn't mean you just start to get to go bag all the alligators you want.
Yeah. Floridians passed the amendment that is intended to preserve forever fishing and hunting, including by the use of traditional methods as a public right and preferred means of responsibly managing and controlling fish and wildlife.
Don't Floridians traditionally use dynamite and bug zappers?
Well, we just hit things with our cars. But yeah, so let's read the full amendment here. Joint resolution proposing to preserve, basically the same thing there. Yeah, no, a declaration of rights. It's only a 2-page initiative. Section 28, fishing, hunting, and the taking of fish and wildlife, including by the use of traditional methods, shall be preserved forever as a public right and preferred means of blah, blah. This section does not limit the authority granted to the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission under Section 9 of Article 4.
It doesn't do anything. It doesn't.
And then it literally just orders that it be placed on the ballot. It doesn't do anything.
It doesn't do anything. It gives you a right to hunt and fish so long as you don't contravene the existing laws.
Yeah. That is the stupidest nonsense.
I'm trying to think of how this could give rise to a cause of action. Like after a disaster or whatever, the cops are like, you can't fish. And I guess now you're able to say, yeah, I can. I guess.
It specifically says that it doesn't limit any authority. So on its face, it's ineffectual. So I think it's like, but under that title, the Fish and Wildlife Commission doesn't have the authority to ban hunting. So it's completely ineffectual.
Right. Because there could be a version of something like this where.
Yeah, bag as many alligators as you want. Who cares?
Right. Or some states, some states allow land that you own and manage. You can hunt what you want on it because it's yours. And some states don't have that. So, implementing this at a state level, because then there's also county regulations of these sorts of things in some states. But at a state level, implementing you have a right to hunt could at least give you a cause of action for, I shouldn't need a hunting license and training to do it on my own land. It's my own land.
Right.
If the deer are stupid enough to come here, I should be able to vaporize them with plasma weapons. But saying that you can't contravene anything that already exists means that you're not given a cause of action from your new right.
I'm a little annoyed by it because it's just that the thing is when lawmakers do these do nothing things, they feel that they have done something. Look, see, I passed a constitutional right to hunt and fish.
I protected your right to hunt and fish.
The state of Florida's constitution, which is a very long constitution, because we have a decently set up state government. But yeah, the state of Florida constitution now says that you have a right to do something and that right is of no effect. And I think this is actually a great statement on the concept of public rights, because it says as a public right. And just like, as the minority in the Supreme Court Heller decision was trying to say, they were trying to say that the Second Amendment is a public right, as opposed to an individual right, a collective right. I think that this this amendment to the Florida Constitution is a perfect example of a public right.
It does.
It's meaningless.
It does nothing.
It
makes you
worthless.
feel good.
Yeah, it's a idiot homism. It's stupid. Whatever. I want to say I'm not mad at it, but I'm mad at it because you wasted energy and resources that could have done something. Like, hey, maybe limit the ability of the Fish and Wildlife Commission to ban people from hunting forever. Right? Because they kind of have insane discretion and authority. They're like really aggressive, and I think they are in most states. Yes. Game cops, they all take their, the grouper troopers all take their.
there's jokes. They're not called grouper troopers where I'm from, but there's jokes about them you're not allowed to say on YouTube.
You're the grouper troopers and the lobster law and all that. It's really something. I don't know. I think we're of one mind on it. Maybe you guys in the comments, if you think this is fantastic, and explain why, please. Maybe it can be illuminating for me. But I think this is just pure nonsense. Yeah. Speaking of pure nonsense, guys, very important. Math Corporation. Look at the updated website. Look at how nice it is. Wow, it's beautiful. Guys, you need to go to maf-arms.com and don't forget to put in your little front pocket promotional code FUDBusters to get yourself a nice little discount. Check out all of the new items that are available and look at all the new little system where you can navigate this stuff. Whoa, it's brilliant. And guys, whoa, Glock compatible parts. You will not see prices this aggressive elsewhere on the world web. So guys, you go to maf-arms.com and don't forget to use promotional code FUDBusters for a fat discount. All right, Mr. Ivan.
Yep.
What happened? Federal judge rules Illinois' assault weapon ban unconstitutional. Is this Freedom Week for Illinois?
No, freedom. It is unfortunately not a freedom week. So the judge at the circuit court, previously we talked about there was oral arguments. There was some very interesting and hilariously stupid things said at oral arguments. But of course, the framework for this entire, what I'm going to call circus, it was pretty close to a circus. The framework for the circus was laid out by the Seventh Circuit and their reversal of the initial preliminary injunction, in which they just sort of made up their own test. In defiance of Heller and Bruin, Seventh Circuit is like, we think this is how gun cases should be evaluated based on how military the guns are.
Whether it's primarily or exclusively useful in a military capacity.
Which is just a fascinating way to look at it. And that's the test that you use to determine if something is an arm.
Right.
Despite the fact that Heller and Bruin spell it out entirely clearly, right? That historical analysis has been done by the Supreme Court. They did it for you.
No. Easterbrook's got it.
They came up with some very interesting ideas, and I will say two things here, because two things can be true at once.
Right.
The judge at this district court said some, he went out of his way to say some things he didn't need to say, like comparing AR-15s and M16s to the Humvee and the Hummer H3, which is a massively headache-inducing analogy if you understand both of those.
Either or both.
He went out of his way to make some analogies and say some things that he didn't have to say to pretend to be following the framework that the circuit had laid out for him to follow.
Right.
However, he also masterfully crafted definitions of the terms like dangerous and unusual and common use and these sorts of things. And the way he defined these terms, I want to stress, is incredibly smart. And if, I'm not saying this will happen, and in fact, it probably won't happen, but if these terms were something the Supreme Court put forth as definitions of these things, I think it would be a very sunny day for the Second Amendment. The way
why don't you tell us about them? Tell us about those definitions he laid out.
So probably the first term and probably the most important one for him to have defined was bearable, actually. So he defines a bearable arm is one which you can carry with you, which is sort of just incorporating what the Supreme Court's already alluded to. But he did a ton of analysis to sort of spell out bearable means this. He goes on to talk about dangerous, and he defines a dangerous weapon as one which you can't really control the effects of. He as evidence of this, he points to machine guns and sawed-off shotguns, which is a real head scratcher. And you may seem like, oh, dude, what are you doing? But he didn't actually have any facts in front of him about machine guns or sawed-off shotguns being this way. He was just sort of inferring that or saying that's the way it works in order to make a definition. If you actually applied his definition to things, I think that's very workable to I mean, even attack, machine gun prohibitions, right? There's a lot of machine guns that you very much can control, point target sort of things on.
Right. And it kind of goes to, I always like to, I think my definition is the best, right? The public nuisance argument where, like napalm bombs and things, right? You can't really direct your wrath. It just kind of happens. But poison gases, etc.
Right.
I think
and
there.
And he even gets to that in Unusual, where he talks about it's an atypical way of neutralizing an opponent. So caustic, incendiary, noxious, poisonous, or radioactive weapons would be examples of this, or weapons that are intended to cause cruel, brutal, or inhumane suffering. But remember, Heller laid this out as a conjunctive thing, dangerous and unusual.
Right.
So it has to both be something that you can't control the effects of and unusual, which is caustic, incendiary, noxious, poisonous, or radioactive. Machine guns are not those. Machine guns are not dangerous and unusual. Very interesting. So he moves on to talk about common use, but I mean, you guys can read the decision. I think it's worth reading because the definitions he lays out are the sort of things that that would really help, I think, or make it more difficult for lower courts to evade the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court just came out and was like, we're going to hold your hand and teach you how to count to 5. It was very well written and thorough in this regard. Almost confusingly, by the end of the way the decision ultimately worked out, skipping to the conclusion section, he got rid of the bans on assault weapons, magazines 30, up to 30 rounds. I don't think he touched the magazine prohibition from 30 upwards or 31 upwards, but I may have to go and double check that. But he certainly the 30 rounds, up to 30 rounds is he got rid of. Right. He then went on to get rid of the regulations of accessories as well as of parts, because both of those were separately banned. But he left in place the ban on belt-fed weapons, including semi-automatic belt-feds, which was interesting, as well as the ban on 50 caliber rifles, 50 caliber ammunition in rifles, which is 50 BMG and not just everything 50 caliber, it's specifically BMG.
The law also specifically targeted rapid-fire devices, right?
It did, and I don't think that was specifically addressed in his conclusion at all, but I believe the rapid fire devices was under attachments. Right. So presumably, despite the fact that I don't think there was any testimony surrounding those, I think that was wrapped up. And in fact, actually, bump stocks were specifically listed, and he included bump stocks as being a part of a semi-automatic rifle, citing Cargill, which I thought was really I thought was fantastic, because it's a very sneaky way for him to have done that, but it's smart and it's a faithful application. It's just weird to see a faithful application happen because we're so used to we're so used to seeing judges try to weasel out. So it's certainly not a perfect victory, but this is, of course, summary judgment. This is a judgment based on the testimony that he had heard. There was like maybe 4 or 5 questions about 50 cal stuff. And it was mostly, can you defend your home with a 50 cal? And the answer was no, because that was another one of the questions the Seventh Circuit wanted him to answer was, is this more like a military arm or not? And his definition of a military arm, I thought was pretty workable, where it means the gun literally has to be, that particular gun has to be used by the military. I thought that was clever. I mean, I think he's being very obtuse, probably even a little bit he's being forced dishonest, to be. But I think that's probably a fair way, legally speaking, that's a sharp way to have that definition work, because it's probably what it should mean when you consider the history of American gun ownership. The military guns are the ones the military literally owns. The ones that are like the military guns, or the ones that the military sold to the civilians, probably aren't military guns anymore. As a legal structure, I can agree with that. Semantic structure, I don't know that I necessarily do, but it's an entirely workable system in that regard. So, of course, the downside here is he stayed this decision for 30 days, which is fairly long as far as these things go. And the state appealed it the day it dropped, and it dropped sort of late in the day on a Friday. And the state immediately, hair trigger, appealed it. So we'll have to see how it goes. The silver lining, right? The interesting thing here is the judge who wrote the decision that reversed the injunction at the Seventh Circuit is retired. She's no longer there. Her role as chief judge at the Seventh Circuit was replaced by Diane Sykes, who is much better, much better from understanding the Constitution and listening to what the Supreme Court told her to do perspective. So we'll have to see. At least one member of this panel is going to be new. If that's Sykes, great. If that's somebody else, maybe it's just a coin flip, assuming we keep Easterbrook and Brennan. Brennan, I think, in his dissent made it very clear that he understood what the Supreme Court was asking of him, because he thought he thought the test that the Seventh Circuit laid out was in complete defiance of the Supreme Court, because it kind of is. And so if we get Easterbrook again, if we get Brennan again, sort of in a coin flip situation. So it will be interesting to see how that appeals process goes. But in a story we'll sort of touch on here in a little bit, and I think we talked about this last week as well, it might not end up mattering, because the New Jersey assault weapons ban is probably going to be the one that answers this question once and for all. And
we will get to that. We will get to that. But so yeah, that's where we're at on that one. Next up, this is great. So Washington, D.C., we know that, we're not sure where the chips lie on a standard, regular standard high capacity magazine ban. Washington, D.C., on the other hand, has a ban on extra large capacity magazines. This is ELCM. So these are the huge ones that, huge extra large magazines that hold more than 10 rounds.
I'm just ready for the super duper extra mega large capacity magazine bans that are over 6.
Yeah. Federal Appeals Court upholds DC magazine ban. Divided 3-judge panel for the DC Circuit affirmed the lower court's decision upholding DC's ban on the possession and sale of extra large capacity magazines. The panel ruled that the city's 10-round limit for magazines fits within the nation's historical tradition of regulating particularly dangerous weapons and those capable of unprecedented lethality, even though there weren't similar bans with the Second Amendment ratified. Here, let's hear something from the decision. Because extra large capacity magazines implicate unprecedented societal concerns and dramatic technological changes, the lack of a precise match does not preclude a finding at this preliminary juncture a historical tradition analogous enough to pass constitutional muster. Therefore, we hold Hansen is not sufficiently likely to succeed on the merits of his claim to warrant the entry of a preliminary injunction against enforcement of the magazine capacity cap. That's so good. How many times does the Supreme Court have to hit before, they accept a standard?
Right. This certainly stands in stark contrast to the opinion from the Illinois case, and of course we are looking at a preliminary injunction versus one that's now a judgment. But whenever you at least, and again, using bad faith framing, a good faith application of Bruin, right, of the Second Amendment, will give you a result that makes sense. It's coherent. A bad faith application with a bad faith framing will give you a bizarre head scratcher of result, where you decide that extra large capacity magazines, these magazines over 10 rounds, are an unprecedented societal change, despite their existence in society for decades without being regulated out of society. It's a real head scratcher. And again, we've got, if we're to go to Bruin's analog stage, you have things analogous to this happening throughout history where, again, it was Britain.
The Garen Puckle.
The founders were aware of and saw a lot of single shot firearms and were around to see that start to change. And certainly by the Civil War, there was a great many people killed by firearms that, if we're to allege the analog to capacity is how fast you can fire the gun, because that's really what we're getting to. The muzzle loading muskets of the Civil War did load faster because paper patch cartridges are a whole heck of a lot faster than the nonsense that was going on before then, and having percussion caps is a hell of a lot faster than the nonsense that was going on before then.
In a prism.
And also, they had cartridge firearms in the Civil War. They saw all of this. And did they ban these things? No, they didn't do that.
No, they were like, cool.
They were like, cool. You know what they did?
A lever gun, in some instances, repeating firearms.
And then 20 years removed from the Civil War is probably too late to be looking for analog. The U.S. government starts selling the silly things to civilians.
They're
like, do you want these? We want new ones, so you can have these old ones.
Yeah, we want to buy Krags. Would you like our trapdoors? And everyone goes, no. And they go, what if we pretty them up? That actually happened, by the way. The U.S. government. Was it you who found this, or was it Evan?
Evan had found this for us.
Yeah, Evan found this, that the U.S. government had actually sporterized trapdoors to sell to to civilians so that they could buy Krags.
and then 10, 15 years after that, they'd be selling Krags so they could buy Springfields.
Yeah, they were like, do you want this? Look how shiny.
This was a mistake. I mean, this is a really good, honest rifle. And think about Teddy Roosevelt. You won't.
Yeah, Rough Rider, rough. But yeah, so that's really something. I thought when Bruin came down that it's like, thank God we finally got a solid standard that like they cannot jerk us around on anymore. And I was so foolish not to consider that they would just ignore it.
Well, like ignore it in the most hilarious ways too, where they're like they just blatantly understand, like we can't even pretend they tried to understand what analogs are being asked for. Again, Thomas spells it out. We look at the how and the why. I don't think they did either of those if they did, they didn't do it very seriously here. Yeah. And besides that, the court sort of stumble around this question of arms and start inventing the most bizarre tests imaginable to figure out what is and isn't an arm, despite the fact that both Heller and Bruin independently say, we've already done that analysis for you. Yeah. Arms means bearable arms. It's the things that the weapons of offense and armor of defense. The things that you take in your hands to cast wrath, and the things that you wear to protect yourself. Yep. Like they spelled this out in bleeding detail from multiple sources on multiple occasions. Yeah. And then lower courts are like, yeah, but what is it, like a military, or is it? But we need to know if it's a military to yeah, but not this one. Because it's like a military. It's not an arm. If it's like a military,
that is so like hilariously sophist. It's it's fundamentally unserious, and I guess we'll just see how long they get to do it for.
And I think here's me telling the Supreme Court how to do their jobs, because I got this one figured out. I think that if they pass down definitions of all of the terms that the lower courts want to like try and pretend are too confusing, like if they define arm and define bearable and define common use, and they define dangerous and they define unusual, the lower courts will be left with nothing to do except they can get it wrong. But when they get it wrong, it will be so bleedingly obvious that they got it wrong that then our appeals courts should be able to sort it out.
Yeah. So this is a good one. So they had agreed, the court had agreed that, okay, these extra large supersized magazines, sure, they might be used for lawful purposes such as self-defense all the time, right? But their argument was, but that doesn't mean you can't find a historical analog that'll allow it. So let's listen to this. And of course, they're pretending to deal with the how and why. So this is them explaining why effectively the Statute of Northampton, which again regulated only carrying dangerous and unusual weapons, but this is them explaining how that and the other, like the local versions of Northampton, could be applied to support the extra large capacity magazine ban. So although these laws, the historical laws, may target different crimes than the magazine cap, they share the same basic purpose: to inhibit then unprecedentedly lethal criminal activity by restricting or banning weapons that are particularly susceptible to and were widely used for multiple homicides and mass injuries. Because many of the preceding examples are also outright bans on an entire class of weapons, they impose a burden on the right to armed self-defense comparable to, if not greater than, the burden imposed by the district's magazine cap. And so if they're talking about categorical hardware restrictions, they must be going beyond the Civil War era. Yes. Like there was very rarely stuff, and often it was handgun restrictions at the state level, but they have to be completely dispensing with a honest historical analysis, because like you were saying, unprecedented gains in lethality were every decade.
Yes.
At that time, right? Like in the course of just over, a relatively short period of time, you went from matchlock to flintlock to percussion cap, and percussion cap was like hilarious, like a hilarious acceleration. And then you get cartridge, which is like a 10x, right? The difference between a Kentucky musket and a trapdoor is easily 10 times.
It's huge. It's huge.
Easily 10 times, probably more. And you know what everyone thought? Cool.
We're going to sell these to the people.
Yeah, we're going to sell these to everybody. Like the most high-tech shit that we have right now, because we want to get the next thing, we're going to sell it to everybody. And, I do hate when people bring up the Garandoni air rifle, right? Because it is just not a good analog. And the founders did look at it and they were like, that's cool, it's way too expensive and it has no muzzle energy. And
then the Austrians lost a war with it.
Yeah, but people, like, they were interested. And why were they interested? Because of the suggestion that you could fire multiple times in quick succession. That's why they were interested in it. They weren't terrified of it. They didn't say don't bring any more. They were like, we'd like to see that. Wow, this sucks. And then they moved on, right? And kept shoving paper patches down there on their bores. But yes, this analysis that we're looking at here is 1,000% means ends scrutiny.
And just to tag on that, it definitely pretends Heller didn't happen and that there was no analysis in Heller, because the analysis in Heller was dealing with the question of when the historical analog presented in the Statute of Northampton could be applied. And they resoundingly said, right, it's not unclear. What Heller found is you don't get to use that as an analog if the arm you're talking about is in common use for lawful purposes. There may be other reasons you're not able to use that as an analog, but here's one that makes it very clear. It's not a dangerous and unusual weapon if it's a common weapon. Right. Very easy to understand. And then the court looks at that here. The court looks at that here and just loses their mind about it. They're pretending that, this is really hard to figure out. There's the categorical bans, and we can do this because of unprecedented lethality. Yeah. Well, actually, there was a moment of clarity, right, where one judge, Justin Walker, wrote separately, and he was like, I would have struck down this ban at the first step. So then he says, in District of Columbia v. Heller, the Supreme Court held that the government cannot categorically ban an arm in common use for lawful purposes. Magazines holding more than 10 rounds of ammunition are arms in common use for lawful purposes. Therefore, the government cannot ban them. And that's it, right? The entire analysis should have been that one paragraph, and that's it. Yep. The majority. Heller settled this one. The majority were, he was a Orange Man appointee,
but in the majority was a Barack Obama appointee and Douglas Ginsburg, a Reagan appointee. I will tell you, I have had the worst luck with Reagan appointees in court. That is just my experience. But if you want a good experience, guys, you need to go to fflpaymentprocessing.com, guys. FFL Payment Solutions is by FFLs, is for FFLs. They are not going to let you down. These are industry-leading rates. I vouch for these people. I represent these people, and they do my credit card processing. So, guys, why not go to fflpaymentprocessing.com, give them a call. There's no obligation. They'll give you a rate review for free, and they can talk to you about how you can save money in your business. Guys, if you have a local firearms business that's just almost there, hook them up with FFL Payments. Those savings that they can get could be thousands of dollars a month, and it could be enough to put them over the edge, get to that next level. Guys, stop edging your local gun shops. Take them to fflpaymentprocessing.com. Let them know we sent you. Next up, this is what you were talking about, guys. The reply in Snoop v. Brown, Snoop Brown, is coming due soon. And you seem to suggest, and some other pundits and commentators have suggested that the big court might be trying to do a little sniff on it. What's your analysis?
I think so. And remember last time we talked about this, we had touched on the fact that the election was probably going to sway their willingness to take this case up now. The election swayed in the favor of them being able to take this case without fear of reputational repercussions because...
Or court packing?
Right, yeah, or court packing, good God. Yeah, we've avoided that hilarious reality.
It's a hilarious potentiality, right? Like, whenever people bring that up... Yeah, at least for more years. Whenever people bring that up, they're like, well, they can actually do that, right? And I'm like, oh, yes, that is a power that they have. It is one of the powers that I would classify as like a Civil War tier power. But anyway, go on.
The tea leave reading
nice one.
That I've been able to do thus far. And I've seen a couple of other people sort of point to this, and I tend to agree with them, is the court was asked by New Jersey to issue an extension in this case already once. They were given that extension. They asked for another extension. The plaintiffs in this case, now the pro-gun side, were like, well, hang on. You've extended it once, and you're asking for this to be extended to the next calendar year. If it's extended to the next calendar year, that's going to significantly delay how long it would be until the Supreme Court could hear it. We're not down with that. And so the pro-gun side's answer to the second motion to extend was, we're not okay with that. If you're going to let them extend, the maximum amount of time you can let them extend it for still has to let us get this case distributed for conference, which is Supreme Court speak for give the Supreme Court the opportunity to decide to take the case in this calendar year. And the Supreme Court agreed with that plan, and they will. Well, I guess by the time you guys have seen this, the state of New Jersey will have responded to the whether or not the Supreme Court should take this, and they're going to be like, please, Supreme Court, don't take this. Assault weapons are bad. Yeah. But the Supreme Court...
Let me just say, for people who don't know, the first state... So when it doesn't go your way at the Circuit Court of Appeals, you file a petition for writ of certiorari. Remember, the Supreme Court is discretionary. They don't have to hear every case. So in your petition is basically, it's almost like your first briefing. You state the reasons why this case is a good case for the court to hear, including it would resolve a circuit split. It is an important question of law, or the lower court got it hilariously wrong, right? And this has all of that.
Yep.
Right. So you as the petitioner get to say why this case should be taken, and then the opponents get to say why this is actually a bad case, why the lower court got it right, why the court intervening right now would actually be silly and whatever. So that's the stage that we're at here. And basically New Jersey was trying to play little lizard games to try to get the ball kicked away and extend this out as much as possible. And if they had succeeded, by the way, we're not talking about like several months. We're talking about possible multiple years of delay. So go on with what you were saying.
And so it seems like the court will now at least consider whether or not they want to hear this case.
Right.
And their willingness to adjust their willingness to bend to the request to wait to hear this in favor of hearing the case this year, to me might indicate a willingness to take this, plus the way the election went, plus the fact that the Supreme Court isn't stupid and distributed for conference multiple times the Illinois assault weapons ban case, which got a lot of things wrong in the same way that the New Jersey case also flaunted Heller and Bruin. So I think here's my prediction, and I'm going to say it's a joke if I end up being wrong. My prediction is that they will end up taking Snope, and they will use that as the case to deal with hardware bans entirely. I think that the final thing that makes me think that is because this is a hardware ban case, they do not have, well, it's a hardware ban case specifically for assault weapons. They do not have to deal with the question of magazines here. They can keep this narrow. They can say, this is how you deal with hardware ban cases. Go and apply that, and then see if that gets applied correctly for magazines. Because whenever you start dealing with magazines, they sort of have to broach this more or less unanswered question. It's been answered.
Where is an arm?
Right. They haven't answered this in a cohesive way as the accoutrement necessary for working the firearm. Where do we draw the line on, is it given the same exact protection as the arm it would assist in functioning? Is it given a separate set of protection where it's higher? Is it lower? Is there a separate test that you'd use to analyze it because it's just an accessory? The Second Amendment is so hilariously underexplored at the Supreme Court level that I don't think that they're necessarily wanting to like go and poke. You pop two balloons at the same time, right? Like the arms ban case. Oh, and also this is how you do accessories for arms bans. So this way they can pop their one balloon and see how the confetti trapped in that balloon, sprinkles down to the other balloons that they need to pop.
Yeah. It is so interesting because, any like normal rational person is just like, rip off the damn Band-Aid, right? Just do it. But they have this, especially because they're conservatives, like conservative jurists have this thing about like not disturbing the machine, right? Like
that Band-Aid's been there for a while. They really, and there was writing around the time of the founding about laboratories of liberty or whatever it was, but
laboratories of democracy.
The Supreme Court, as far as my best read on them, is they really see it this way, where they're like chemists or mad scientists or whatever, and they're going to put a little drop of reagent A, which is getting rid of assault weapons bans, and they'll sit there and then rub their hands together and go and lightning will crackle in the background, and they're like ooh, and it starts to boil and bubble, and they'll see what it is they made, because they're trying to convert lead.
They're not wanting to change. They're following the scientific method. They're not wanting to change two variables at the same time, right? So they, my analogy would be that they view themselves as like the keepers of like a fine Antikythera mechanism, right? Like, no, you don't change the spring, you just tighten the screw just a little bit. You tighten the screw by half a turn, and then you step back and watch it for 10 years and see if it's keeping time. Even if you can see right now it's off by 81 hours. Wait,
let's see if it just stays off by 81 hours for the next 10 years.
Because then we'd know that was it, right? There's like a lot of interesting ideas that go about in conservative jurisprudence that I really don't like. What like the term judicial activism, right, is like really means a lot to these people, but whereas my opinion is judicial activism just means you disagree with the opinion, right? If you're right, it means you're doing your job, and I know that's like incredibly simplified, but it's a pretty simple proposition when your job is to say what the law is and people are off by a hilarious degree.
Right.
I don't think it preserves anything to go, no, come on, right?
If the clock, if the clock were only off by 81 hours in a span of 10 years, maybe that's not so bad. But if our ancient clock mechanism is off by 370 years in a span of 10 years, I think we can just bump it forward at least 50 years to try and catch it up, and then measure in that 10-year span to see what that did.
Yeah.
And
the idea right now is that, like, it's like, oh, it's a kid riding a bicycle and he's got training wheels, and we're just gonna nudge him back towards the sidewalk, right? And then it zooms out and the sidewalk is 10 miles away and he's actually in the ocean, like drowning, and they just do this. Right? But it's like, no. Hit him, pick him up, say, that's the ocean, idiot, and put him back on the sidewalk and say, drive on this, stupid, and then hit him one more time and walk away. And then might actually maybe not go into the ocean immediately, right? But hey, what do I know? I'm just an idiot. But yeah, we'll see what happens, of course. Speaking of, it's okay, they just need a little tiny adjustment, and then they'll actually follow all of the directives they've been given for the past several decades. The Second Circuit has reissued its Antoniuk ruling following the GVR from the Supreme Court after Rahimi. So, right, yeah, this is about Bruin response law in New York, right? A literal law that was passed to spit in the face of Bruin. The Supreme Court is like, no, do it again. And the Second Circuit dutifully and faithfully issued the same opinion again.
They were like, okay, reconsider in light of Rahimi.
Yeah.
Rahimi didn't affect this. You can have it back.
Well, yeah, and they say this over the course of 200 pages. Yeah, it's reaffirmed all of its prior conclusions, and they spent 200 pages saying, yeah, Rahimi that's not real. The Second Amendment's still not real. Not in New York.
Not in this state.
Yeah. But yeah, one positive Chuck Michelle points out, who we like him.
Yeah, cool guy.
The Second Circuit did say that the Ninth Circuit is pretty weird about saying the vampire rule, which, you can be banned from carrying a gun unless you're invited, right? You have to be invited first before you come into like private property or even public property. The Second Circuit says it disagrees with the Ninth Circuit on that, and so they'll be notifying the Ninth Circuit of the interactions there in the Hawaii and California Bruin response laws.
It's actually fortuitous that they're going to get that backwards in different courts, because another one of these cases that the Supreme Court is probably going to have to adjust, because the kid's not just driven his bicycle to the ocean. At this point, there's a nuclear submarine preparing to launch a missile directly under the kid, and also the shark from Jaws is about to eat him. This kid's in deep trouble.
It's the two kids in the ocean are riding their bicycles at each other, and one of them has the nuclear weapon, and the other's being followed by the shark from Jaws. So it's like, all right.
And they have proximity activated explosive vests on, and also they're tied permanently to their bicycles by barbed wire, and their bicycles are made out of lead, so they're sinking.
Yes. So they might need a full turn of the heading screw.
That these lower courts for now 2-3 years have just blatantly disobeyed the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court was pretty clear, because Bruin's application to cases outside of carry licensure and public carry of firearms, you can at least pretend that it's not confusing, but you can at least pretend it's confusing. But it was pretty exhaustive on analyzing New York's
this exact thing. In fact, they said, do not do this. They specifically said you can't make all of Times Square a sensitive. Like, they said it. And then that's exactly what they try to do.
Yeah, and then New York turns around and literally does the exact thing the court
actually that. And no, we didn't. Not the whole Times Square, just all of it. Right? But hey, whatever. We'll see what happens. This is actually, somebody brought this up a while back. It's like, what if a circuit court just keeps refusing? It has happened, and it's gone both ways. It's gone to the point where the Supreme Court just gets sick of it and ignores it, and it's also gone to the point where the Supreme Court was like, "No, bad dog," right? And directs a judgment.
And I think it was, I mean, my familiarity with this is post-bellum, that immediate post-bellum period. But I know there was a while where the Supreme Court just became the district court for some of these, or circuit court and district court for some of these areas, where they're like, we don't think you guys are listening. Why don't you take a break?
Yeah. Here's your opinion, right? So, guys, last up, patriotpatch.co, guys, longest time supporters of the show and run by the person who used to run this show. So if you like This Week in Guns, well, you should like Patriot Patch Company, because it wouldn't exist if not for him. Custom designed patches and apparel and accessories for any freedom-loving individual. You want to join the Patch of the Month Club for the November exclusive? I just got this in the mail. Wow, I like my turkey well peppered. Look at that. It's a turkey and it's got shotgun. It's got, and it's got the AR shotgun on it with the Ecotech. And it's a fun little patch. I also got a bonus patch this month, which I like way more. And it's the Mario Kart winner. Look at that. It's the Super Shell. It's a Zook with a red tortoise shell on the end of it.
And that's heat seeker.
Trouble. Yeah, they got the meat seeker. That's gonna
seek out your meat.
It's going to cause a problem with your siblings in 1996. So yeah, guys, patriotpatch.co. Don't forget to use promotional code TWIG10, TWIG10, to get a 10% discount on your order. Check out their products and wares. Well, guys, that's all we got for you this week. Thank you guys so much for bearing with us. We have been so busy. Some exciting little notes. Ivan and I wrote a 23,000 word paper.
We did it last night and we got 5 hours of sleep, if you can't tell.
Yeah. On a history of ATF's inconsistent interpretations of the machine gun definition. And I think it is very important. And so be looking for that. It'll be coming out, but we have been just busting our little badooties. And the fact that, so I just want to say, I have the greatest supporters ever, because I disappear for weeks at a time sometimes, and you guys still support, you guys still trust me, and that means the world to me. And it does not go unnoticed. So thank you guys. We will get back to regular production soon. We have a lot of stuff in the pipeline. We've got like 20 episodes that are already filmed. I guess I'll put this out there. I really need help with editing. And so if you're a Patreon or whatever in the Discord, come let us know if you'd be willing to help with that, because we got a ton of material. We are pulled in so many directions, and we are doing really important things. But unfortunately, it means some things have to get backburnered, right? But always, and I'm sure all of my supporters would agree with this, whenever I have somebody who is in custody, subject to some of the unjust, unlawful applications of these laws, they take first priority, right? And then, we triage from there. But I'm so happy to be able to do this with you guys. Ivan, I'm so happy for you always being able to be there with me, because we were busting our butts today too. It is now 3:25 a.m., by the way, because we said, no, we're doing this. This has to get done. They waited too long. So just want to give my thanks again to all of our supporters, the supporters of my Patreon, supporters of Ivan's Patreon. Yep. Thank you for making this possible and also rewarding. So yeah, anyway, good night.
Yeah, love you.